Okay, let's dive into the story of Marcus Tullius Cicero. Here's a guy who stood against all the chaos of civil war and dictatorship in ancient Rome. He was a fighter, for sure, but his weapons, they weren't legions and swords. His weapons were words.
We're actually going to start at the end, because Cicero's story ends with this brutal, symbolic act. I mean, the very hands that wrote against tyranny, the head that spoke out against it, they were put on public display for everyone to see. It was the ultimate savage triumph of the sword over the word.
So that begs the question, right? How did Rome's greatest champion of the law end up executed without a trial? I mean, this is the central question of his life, a life spent defending the rule of law, which, in the end, couldn't save him from just raw political violence. So we're going to explore exactly that, how the power of his voice rose, how it faded, and how it still echoes through history, all set in the final chaotic days of the Roman Republic.
All right, Section 1, the new man's ascent, from outsider to consul. Cicero's story is a classic underdog tale. He wasn't born into that tight-knit aristocracy that ran Rome. Not at all. He had to fight his way in. And let me tell you, his climb was incredibly steep.
And this term you see here, novus homo, or new man, it's absolutely key to understanding Cicero. This wasn't just some label, it was a massive social barrier. See, his family was wealthy, sure, but they were from the equestrian class, not those ancient, powerful senatorial families. For a guy like him to even get a foot in the door was a huge, huge achievement. And he did it with the one thing he had in spades, pure intellectual brilliance.
And you can see just how fast he shot up the political ladder, the cursus honorum, as they called it. He basically used the courts as his personal stage. He'd take on these high-profile cases that made him an absolute superstar, like when he prosecuted that corrupt governor, Varus. And it worked. By 63 BCE, this new man had made it to the very, very top, consul of Rome.
So his year as consul, it was both his finest hour and his most fateful moment. On the one hand, he uncovered this violent plot to overthrow the government, led by an aristocrat named Catiline. And get this, he defeated it, not with an army, but with a series of absolutely devastating speeches. They called him Pater Patriae, father of the fatherland. But, and this is a big but, in his rush to save the state, he ordered the execution of the conspirators without a full trial. And that one decision, that single act, would come back to haunt him. It became a weapon his enemies used against him for the rest of his life.
Okay, on to Section 2, preserving a republic's soul when political power fades. So in the years that followed his consulship, the whole game in Rome started to change. You had these powerful generals, we're talking about guys like Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, and they began to just dominate politics. Their power didn't come from speeches, it came from their armies. And Cicero, the man of words, the civilian statesman, well, he found himself getting pushed further and further to the sidelines.
So what does a man of words do when he's forced into what he called a dreadful silence? Well, if you're Cicero, if you can't shape the Republic in the Senate, you try to save its soul on the page. And this part is so important to get. His philosophical work wasn't some quiet retirement project. No way. It was an act of political defiance. It was his way of fighting for the Republic's ideals when the men with swords didn't want to listen.
And what he did was just monumental. He took on this massive project of translation. But he wasn't just translating words, he was translating entire ideas. He'd take this dense, complex Greek philosophy and literally create a Latin vocabulary for it. Words we still use today. Concepts like quality, moral, essence, a lot of that comes from him. He basically built a bridge that carried Greek thought into the Roman world and from there into the entire course of Western civilization.
And this quote right here, this captures what might be his most powerful idea ever, the concept of natural law. Just think about this for a second. He argued that there's a universal moral law that exists, one that comes from reason and from nature itself. And this law, it stands above any king, any dictator, any government. It's the idea that no ruler, no matter how powerful, can make something that is morally wrong right. And that idea, wow, it would echo for centuries, influencing everyone from the early church fathers all the way to the American founders. So now we're at Section 3, the last stand, one final gamble. Because everything changes on the Ides of March, 44 BCE. Julius Caesar is assassinated. The city is thrown into absolute chaos. And for Cicero, who'd been living under Caesar's dictatorship in that dreadful silence, this was it. This was his chance, one last desperate gamble to bring back the republic he loved so much.
And he went all in.
He threw himself back into the political arena with absolutely everything he had. He picked a target, Caesar's right-hand man, Mark Antony, who he saw as just the next tyrant in waiting. And he unleashed a series of 14 fiery, uncompromising speeches against him, known as the Philippics. I mean, they are masterpieces of political attack, brilliant, vicious, and basically a final declaration of war.
But in this all-out war against Antony, Cicero made a fatal miscalculation. He decided to back Caesar's young and pretty much unknown heir, a teenager named Octavian. Cicero figured he could control the kid. He even said Octavian was a young man to be praised, used, and set aside. Oh, he could not have been more wrong. Yeah, his whole strategy just backfired spectacularly. Turns out the young man he so badly underestimated was a political genius in his own right. Instead of fighting Antony, Octavian joined him. Together, they formed a new three-man dictatorship, the Second Triumvirate. And when they sat down to draw up their hit list, a list of enemies to be executed, Antony had only one demand that was non-negotiable. Cicero's name had to be at the very top.
So he was hunted down near his villa, and when they found him, he faced his end with this incredible stoic dignity. He knew the fight was over, his reported last words to his executioner. They were this quiet rebuke, a final defense of principle against brute force. The swords had finally, inevitably, defeated his words.
And now, Section 4, an echo through history, the posthumous victory. Look, by every measure of his own time, Cicero failed. The republic he fought for died. The Roman Empire rose from its ashes. He lost. But, and this is the amazing part, his real victory, his true influence, was only just beginning.
It's incredible, really. You can trace a direct line of his ideas right through history. His Latin translations, they preserved Greek thought through the Dark Ages. Then, hundreds of years later, the Renaissance scholar Petrarch rediscovers his personal letters, and it helps spark a whole new way of thinking. Fast forward again, the great thinkers of the Enlightenment are reading him closely, borrowing his ideas about government and natural law. And yep, the founders of modern republics, like the United States, they were quoting him directly.
And this is the great paradox of his life, isn't it? His ultimate victory came directly from his failure. Think about it. Because the Republic died, he was forced to write about what it should have been. He became its greatest eulogist. And by giving the Republic's death such a powerful, eloquent voice, he made its ideals immortal.
Which kind of brings us back to this big question. In an age of crisis, are words ever enough? Cicero's entire life revolves around that. He believed down to his core in reasoned debate, in persuasion, in the rule of law. And in the end, he was cut down by men who believed only in force. His story doesn't really give us an easy answer. It just leaves us with that challenge, a question that feels just as relevant today as it was in the final bloody days of the Roman Republic.